Despite a new surge in COVID-19 cases and the death toll steadily creeping up, there seems little public concern about the government's response. I'm joined by NBR political editor Brent Edwards. Brent, why don't we start with how different the government's response to the pandemic is now compared with earlier, I guess particularly about this time last year?
Well, if you think back in the middle of, when we were supposedly in the middle of the pandemic, only a handful of cases caused massive alarm. And of course, we had these daily press conferences. And if there was a death, it was a matter of almost national mourning, which obviously for the families involved, it would have been terrible. But now it's been, obviously in September, the government removed the traffic light system and basically took away all kind of restrictions, including the requirement to wear masks on public transport. And now, we're having, daily cases. Well, on Tuesday, over 6,000 cases in a day. We're having, deaths every week, in the tens or so. The number of deaths, and this is people who have actually died directly or where COVID was a contributing cause. So, they wouldn't have died if it hadn't been for COVID. So that's over 2,200 now. So the sense is quite different. I mean, if we were back a year, this would be huge alarm. But now, of course, the public clearly got wearied of lockdowns, and the government, no country could carry on locking down. And if you look at China, you can see even an authoritarian state like that is having a real problem convincing its public that they should remain locked down. So, that all had to change. But it's just that there's very little commentary or comment. Even thinking back to early this year when the protesters were out the front of Parliament, and one of their big gripes was the injuries and deaths being caused by the vaccines. Well, none of them have rolled back up because of the deaths being caused by COVID. Quite a different situation, but everyone seems pretty blasé about it now.
Is it COVID fatigue, or is it something else? Do you think it's, are people more worried by economic problems, say, or?
Well, yeah, I think it's a mixture. I think it's COVID fatigue, and people had got sick of lockdowns, and as I say, you couldn't keep people locked down forever. And the government knew that. It always saw it as an initial response and to try and get through those initial waves. And, there's little doubt when you look at the numbers that, the New Zealand's death toll was much lower than many other countries. But it had to let the thing off, and of course, that part of it too was then driven by the economics, because clearly those lockdowns did cause lots of problems for particularly hospitality, tourism and the like, and you couldn't keep on squeezing those sectors. And now though, for most people, I guess, who are going about their daily lives, the things that they're worrying about much more will be inflation, interest rates going ever higher, and now the prospects of a recession next year. So they certainly seem to outweigh any concerns people might have about the health effects of COVID. They're much, much more worried now about the economic impacts of, the pandemic and the response to it.
Do you think the health response to the pandemic is likely to feature in next year's election at all, or?
Look, not likely at all, because in part too, because the opposition parties, National and ACT, are hardly going to attack or criticise the government over its current approach to COVID from a health perspective. What they criticised the government for doing was for not easing restrictions earlier and much quicker. So, no political party, apart from perhaps the Greens and Te Pāti Māori, have raised concerns and suggested, for instance, that the government, as it was advised to do by health officials, should have at least kept on, the mask mandate, so required masks to be worn on public transport and the like. But obviously I think the government, the Labour Party, has picked up that there's enough public disenchantment even with that they've dropped it. And I think that was partly probably looking to the election next year. They didn't want to annoy people anymore. And the interesting thing is, in 2020, the last election, the government got rewarded for its response to COVID-19. Next year, it may be punished for it.
Brent, thanks very much for your time.